Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Nathan Lawrence here, Hoshana Rabbah, and good to have you join us, all of you on Zoom, as well as those who will be watching this YouTube video later after I get it edited and posted up there. So we're almost to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and over the last several years, I have been doing a Torah teaching on every one of the Torah portions from Genesis to Deuteronomy, and we're almost finished. It's taken me several years and to get this task accomplished, and I think I've just about tagged every base, or maybe one along the way that I missed, but if so, we'll go back and pick that up later. But this week, let me put my glasses on. This week we are going to cover Deuteronomy 31. Just one chapter, Deuteronomy 31, 1 through 30. And it's Vayelekh. Vayelekh is the Hebrew name for that. So there's a number of things that we could cover in this scripture, or in this chapter, this week's Torah portion. But I'm going to give a teaching I've never given before. I actually wrote the notes of this out quite a few years ago. And I've never actually published these notes, and I've never given it as a teaching that I recall. I don't think I have any videos up there. And it has to do with the biblical standards for spiritual leadership. And the scripture we want to cover in this week's Torah portion is where Moses is about to die. He's about to go to his reward, and he is, let me turn this light on here. That'll be a little bit less of a glare. There we go. I've got my own cameraman, my own lighting expert, and my own editor, and all of that. And that person is me. So it's a one-man kind of a thing here. Productions. That's my production staff. Is me, myself, and I. Anyway, so Moses here is commissioning Joshua, and they're getting ready to cross over. The Israelites are getting ready to cross over the Jordan River. And he is encouraging the Israelites to go onward and upward. And then in verse 7, we read, "Then Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, 'Be strong and of good courage, for you must go with the people to the land which Yehovah has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. And Yehovah, he is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear nor be dismayed.'" So Moses had been mentoring Joshua for 40 years. And as you know, the older generation of Israelites died in the wilderness because of their doubt and unbelief and their sin. And it was the younger generation, all those who were under the age of 20 and younger, who, when they came out of Egypt, by this time, some of the older ones were probably 40, but it was a very young group that was going into the land of Israel. And of that older generation, as you know, only two got to go in, Joshua and Caleb. And Caleb was to be the leader. Joshua would be the leader. And Joshua is a type of Yeshua. We're not going to talk about that right now. We read that in the book of Hebrews. He was a prototype of Yeshua who leads us into the promised land. And Yehoshua, a shortened version of Yehoshua, is Yeshua. And the modern name for Joshua is Joshua. Basically, it's almost like Yeshua. And there's a real play on Hebrew words there. We won't get into that. But what I want to talk about is the biblical standards for spiritual leadership. This is something that the church does not understand. When I say the church, I'm talking about the Christian church, and quite frankly, most of the Messianic church does not understand either. Messianic or Hebrew roots. And it's about time somebody begins to teach about these things, because quite frankly, it's rather stunning when you actually read what the Bible has to say about it, because the Bible explicitly and implicitly delineates certain standards that must be met before one can assume leadership roles over Yehovah's people. And we as redeemed Israelites should know what the standards are and what YHVH Elohim demands of his leaders. And we should expect our leaders to meet those biblical standards. If they don't, then we should reject them as leaders. These standards must apply to leaders over and within congregations and ministries. And many individuals who are in ministry are not associated with congregations, so it must be questioned whether these standards should apply to them as well. But I believe that there are certain basic standards that should apply to all people, whether they're in congregational leadership or not. And so in this study, I draw from the whole counsel of YHVH's word, from Genesis to Revelation. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. I've never published this teaching before, but I'm going to publish it on my blog so you can get the notes. I'm giving you the Cliff Notes today of this teaching. It's a 5-page teaching. We're going to try to just skim over the waves. Let me just state this, and this will shock a lot of people, but once you hear the truth of it, it'll, once your eyes see something you can't unsee, and you're going to start evaluating things maybe differently, more from biblical perspective and more from Elohim standards rather than man's standards that determine whether somebody is leading the people of Yah or not. Let me just say, man's standards for leadership and YHVH's standards for leadership are often diametrically opposed or incongruous or on totally do not line up. Let me just say, I cannot find anywhere in the Bible where the standard criteria for leadership and ministry responsibilities and ministry positions that the church normally looks to as qualifications. I cannot find these in the scriptures. Let me give you some example. There are many people out there in ministry who are self-appointed. They're self-appointed, and as a result of just launching themselves into ministry, they now have a successful ministry. By and large, this really is not a biblical criteria for validating a legitimate ministry. That's number one. Number two, the use of ecclesiastical titles and the earning of academic degrees is not a biblical qualification. You cannot even find it in the Bible. When I say ecclesiastical titles, I'm talking about reverend, bishop, pastor, father, pope, whatever, rabbi. These are not titles in the Bible that were used ecclesiastically. Some of these were apostle, prophet. Some of these were job descriptions, but many times people will take titles to themselves to give themselves an air of legitimacy. And similarly, they will earn, PhDs or theological doctorates or masters of ministry or doctors of ministry or whatever. And they will have studied at some seminary or Bible college or whatever. And this supposedly qualifies them for ministry. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but these are not biblical qualifications. You cannot find this in the Bible. Number three, popularity among people. Popularity does not make a person or qualify a person for ministry. There are many ministers out there that are very popular, but they have not been called by Elohim, and they do not meet the biblical qualifications for ministry. In fact, most of the ministers in the Bible were not popular. They were not going before kings and presidents unless they were being drugged there in chains, or very few examples of ministers in the Bible finding popularity with kings. Most of the time it was the opposite. Professional, another thing, oratory and public presentation skills. There are a lot of ministers out there who are really good at oration. They're very glib, and they're well spoken, and they look good, and they have they're photogenic, and they've got cameras, and they've got good sets. And I'm coming to you from a converted chicken house here. I literally swept chicken feathers and rabbit droppings out of this building 30 years ago and turned it into my office, prayer room, studio, whatever, a Bible study center, prayer meeting room, and all that. That's what I'm coming to you from. There's no money, nothing behind this. And I'm coming to you. I'm being filmed on my iPhone. I used to have a studio camera, but the new iPhones have a higher quality than the studio camera, the Canon studio camera that I bought many years ago. So now I just use my iPhone. It's really very simple. I mean, that's how it is. What can I say? I'm just being honest with you. So oration and the venue and all the glamour and the lights and the backdrop and all that's not anything that really means anything with Yehovah, and you do not find that in the Bible. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not a qualification. How about the size? Oh, the professional-looking packaging of a person, ministries, their website, materials to merchandise. A lot of people judge a book by the cover, and they will see that, oh man, he's got a great website, or she's got a great website, or she's got all these accolades and accomplishments, all these validations, and all these people, and blah blah blah, likes and whatever. That may be all right, and that person may be valid, but that's not in the Bible. That's not a biblical qualification for legitimacy in ministry. The size of one's mailing list, how big their congregation is, the trappings associated with their ministry, all of that doesn't mean anything either with Yehovah, and you don't find that in the Bible. How about length of time in the ministry? Oh, he's been a pastor for 20 years. His father was a pastor, his grandfather. Again, that may or may not mean anything, but that's not a biblical qualification. Acceptance among peers and within the church. That is not a qualification or a criteria for determining the legitimacy of ministry. Financial or material success. We're talking about the health and wealth guys and some of the televangelists who have big homes and they're got fancy cars and jets and all that. That doesn't mean anything. That means nothing with Yehovah, whether they do or they don't. And the number of books published, the number of electronic media one has been on, TV programs, radio. Again, that doesn't mean anything. That's not to say a person who is involved in those things is not legitimate. I'm just saying these are not biblical criteria for being in the ministry. Moreover, I'll take this to the next level. The Bible nowhere indicates that any of these criteria are necessarily qualify one to be in leadership role. In fact, the biblical record clearly shows that usually the more popular among men and the more successful by worldly standards that religious leaders are, the more unpopular they are with Yehovah. It's the inverse. In fact, Yeshua, for example, when addressing religious leaders of his day, emphatically stated that which is highly esteemed or uplifted or eminent, exalted or influential or honorable by man's standards is an abomination or a foul thing or detestable or idolatrous in the sight of Elohim. Go read it for yourself in Luke 16:15. He's talking to the religious leaders of his day. Why is this? Because Yehovah looks at the heart of man and women and not at the outward appearance. 1 Samuel 16:7, Matthew 15:8. We're called to judge righteous judgment and to know things by their fruit. By their fruits you shall know them. So what are the biblical standards of leadership? Well, I think certain things should go almost without saying, but I'm going to say them anyway. First of all, he needs to be saved. He needs to have been, he or she. I say he, but just know that I'm not being sexist here. I mean, anyone who's in ministry must be saved. They must have been converted from the kingdom of darkness to that of light and be born of the Spirit, begotten, born of the Spirit of Elohim, and be in a vital one-on-one relationship with Yeshua and have a public testimony in the spiritual fruits in his or her life to verify his right standing before Yehovah Elohim in this regard. I'll just say this, that many, many people, the Bible says, know those who labor among you. Many people in ministry We do not know anything about them. All we know is what we see on the camera, we see on their website, on their YouTube channel, or their Facebook page, or on TV, or hear them on the radio. But we don't know anything about their character. We don't know anything about their marriage, about their children, about their standing in the community. We'll talk more about that later. Their reputation, their character, how many times they've been married, what's their personal life like? Are they righteous, or are they just putting on an act? A lot of good actors out there. There are a lot of good actors out there, and you probably known of a few. So it's really tough when you're dealing with people that all you know is you see a face, a talking head, and you don't know anything about them. That's really not a good thing either. But we do the best we can in this electronic age. The person must be called into the ministry by YHVH Elohim. This calling will be recognized. It's not just, oh, God called me. No, this calling will be recognized by other spiritual leaders who know the individual and who can confirm the reality of the divine calling upon his life. Let every word be established in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So I can get up there and say, yeah, Elohim called me, and I can be making it up and I can be acting it out. That doesn't mean he's called me. But if others around me who know me, to whom I'm accountable, who maybe I've mentored under, who have known me for a long time, who are also themselves spiritually stable, and they can confirm that, then we've got something to go on. This call will be substantiated by the spiritual fruits, the fruits of the Spirit, resulting in the expansion of YHVH's kingdom on this earth. And again, I've got scriptures for all of these things. I'll be putting that up on my notes on the blog to this. Leaders must adhere to several main tenets of the biblical faith, which are salvational issues. If one cannot, before his Creator, attest to these basic tenets of biblical faith, then we must reject him or her as being YHVH ordained, an ordained leader. For one to teach against these tenets of biblical truth, we believe makes one a false teacher and places one in jeopardy of either losing one's salvation or having never been the recipient of salvation in the first place. These tenets of our faith, and again, these go without saying, but I'm going to say them anyway, that the scriptures of YHVH, the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is the inspired, inerrant word of Elohim. That the Torah is for all redeemed Israelites, that includes all Jews and non-Jews, past, present, and future. Now, having said that, there are many, I believe, called ministers in the Christian church that say that the Torah has been done away with, but they, in fact, are following much of the Torah, minus the biblical holidays, the Sabbath, and the dietary laws. So they're still following many aspects of the Torah. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill, commit adultery, steal, honor your parents, not covet, do not take God's name in vain. Well, they don't even know what his name is, most of them. It's YHVH Elohim and Yeshua the Messiah. But, as far as they understand, they're not worshiping idols. So there's many other things that they do that should be counted to their credit. But there's certain things they are not doing. So I believe that I've seen the fruits. He recognizes many of these people, and once they understand the light of truth, they will come to the higher level in their understanding with regard to Torah. Number 3, that Yeshua is the YHVH Elohim incarnate. He is the Son of Elohim, the Father. He was born of a virgin. He lived, died, and was resurrected, died on the cross for our sins. So these are basic aspects of the deity and the work and the ministry of Yeshua the Messiah. And that we are saved by grace, the grace of Elohim through faith in Yeshua, as evidenced by the fruits of the Torah of Torah obedience and the work and the fruit of the Spirit of Elohim. And that's based on Ephesians 2:6-8 and other places. Also, and I start this as a jumping off place. Basically, Paul lays out the qualifications for eldership in 1 Timothy 3:2-7. And Titus 1:5-9. And many people who are in ministry do not fit these qualifications. Some do. But these are the qualifications. This is what the word of Elohim says. I'm not making it up. Number 1, he must be married. And there's reasons for that. He must be a father. He must be shepherding his family and righteously righteously. And now this would be for pastoral leadership or eldership. It doesn't mean this doesn't mean that one can't be involved in other ministry, maybe evangelistic ministry, prophetic ministry, teaching ministry. But as far as being an actual pastor or a head elder in a congregation, these are the qualifications that Paul lays out. Marriage is important because if one hasn't gone through marriage and experienced the raising of children in some way, and I'm reading into Paul's qualifications here, then he may have a hard time pastoring, shepherding the sheep, because trust me, marriage and children, you have to be a shepherd of in that situation. And once you learn that, it prepares you for a lot. And until you've actually experienced that, it's going to be very hard. I'm not saying impossible. It's going to be harder to parent in an apostolic sense a congregation. He must be shepherding his family and righteously and in righteousness. And Paul states this. He mustn't be making his full time or primary living or income from the ministry, nor should his wife be supporting him financially. I can't tell you how many ministers make their full-time living from the ministry. This is not how the Levites did it. This is not how the Apostle Paul did it. Certainly Yeshua didn't make his living from the ministry. Of course, he didn't have a family to support. But I do not find this really in the Bible. Either they lived off their own resources. Now, that doesn't mean that those that they fed didn't feed into them and give them. But if you are making your living full-time from the ministry, then you're going to have a hard time preaching the full truth of the Bible, because you're going to be concerned about making an income and not offending the giving units. When you don't make your full-time living from the ministry, then you're going to be more apt to preach the whole truth of the word, whether it offends people or not. So you're not going to have a conflict of interest and be compromised. That's what I read in this. But Paul, this was the example of Moses, Joshua, the Levites, and Paul. They must have an excellent reputation in the secular community. Because if you don't, then there's something wrong, and you don't have any business any business standing up in front of the community of the believers, because you're a hypocrite. He mustn't be a novice in the word of Elohim and in the Torah. He should have gone through at least 5 Torah cycles. Why do I say 5? Because the Levites, including the Kohanim, the priests, were trained for 5 years from age 25 to 30 before they became full-fledged priests and before they were teaching others. The Levites were the ones that taught Torah in Israel. But I come across people regularly who've been in the Torah for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Now they've got a Bible study, and now they're teaching everybody everything they don't know. And they're teaching things. They just don't have the experience. And even then, the new Levites that were, when they became a Levite or a priest at age 30, I guarantee you they were still under the mentorship of older men. So just because you've gone through 5 Torah cycles for 5 years, you still need to be under the mentorship of older men. And the Hebrew Roots movement is a train wreck in many respects. And those of you who've been around for 10, 20 years in this thing, or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years like I have, you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. You've seen people that are young people that are in the ministry, and they haven't been married, they haven't had raised children, they barely know the Bible, they don't know the Torah, but they learn just enough to be dangerous. It's very dangerous. People like that who have a ministry call in their lives still need to be mentoring and be under the oversight of older individuals who have been in it for a while. We could talk a lot about that, but we'll stop at that point. So leaders must have gone through a period of preparation and training for ministry. This is the biblical model. It cannot be circumvented. Following the Torah's criteria for Levitical apprenticeship, a leader in training had to spend 5 years, as I said, from age 25 to 30. And again, I've got the scriptures for that. It's listed about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in the book of Numbers alone, starting in Numbers 4 and continuing in Numbers chapter 8. Leaders must have a mature walking and understanding of the Torah and be able to teach and expound on it. It was the duty of the Levites to teach the Torah and the kings of Israel to know the Torah and to rule Israel by it. Not only did the king have to read the Torah, but he had to write it out. He had to write out the Torah. You learn a lot more when you write something out than when you just merely read it. It gets ingrained in you. Now, I grant you, the disciples spent only 3.5 years with Yeshua before he launched them. They didn't spend 5 years. It was 3.5 years. But then that was Yeshua, and it was full time. So I guess if you're sitting at the feet of Yeshua, the time can be abbreviated because it's Yeshua. I mean, you're going to get the nectar. You're going to get the quintessential essence, and you're going to get it well. So anyway, they spent a little bit less time, but the normal apprenticeship time was 5 years. Moses apprenticed. He was a shepherd in the wilderness for 40 years, and then he met Yeshua at the burning bush. So he trained under his father-in-law, who was a priest, Jethro, who was a priest, a Cohen in Midian, a righteous priest. Joshua trained under Moses for 40 years before he was launched. Samuel trained under Eli. David was anointed when he was 13, but he had or right around there, but he had a 17-year training process mentored by Samuel till he was 30 when he became the king over the southern kingdom, and then 3 years later over the northern half of the kingdom. And you know, Elisha trained under Elijah, and there are many other examples in the scripture. Basically, the one of my mentors, the one who mentored me in street preaching, he said this is the biblical model of mentorship. It goes like this: I do it. I do it, and you watch me. We do it together. You do it, and I watch you. You do it, and I walk away. You do it alone. And then while you're doing it, I come back to check up on you. Now, that is the biblical model of discipleship. Now, people will, and I'm not here to lift myself up, but I'm just being transparent. People ask me how many, what Bible college did you study at? Where did you study Bible? Well, to be honest with you, I haven't taken a single Bible class. I've studied at 5 academic institutions of higher learning, but I have not taken a single Bible class. I've studied other things. Well, how do you know so much? Well, first of all, I had godly parents that raised me. I was born in church, basically. I was born at a Bible college, although I wasn't, they were attending it. So I was raised by godly people. And I started reading my Bible when I was about 8 and praying every day when I was about 8 because I followed the example of my parents. They had these disciplines. So my parents mentored me and discipled me. And I had a grandfather who was a godly, born-again, spirit-filled man who also mentored me, especially later on in my, up to about age 40. And then I began to preach in a church under the leadership and eldership of older men, my father and another elder. And then I ministered at Teen Challenge for 3.5 years? I don't remember. And I was under the eldership and the mentorship of the leader of Teen Challenge in Portland, Oregon there. And then I ministered in other places too, under leadership, mentoring and learning. Eventually I became a street preacher. I also youth pastored, and so I was under pastors and leaders during that time. And then I mentored on the streets as a street preacher, and I mentored under somebody who's now in his mid-80s, but he had been a street preacher for years. He was a pastor, ordained minister. And I could just go down the list. Then I was in a Foursquare church. I left the Sabbath and the Torah for a few years. I was in a Foursquare church where I had elders, and I was ordained there as a church evangelist. And then started a congregation, and I had people that that I was being mentored under at that time, and I looked to. Then I joined the Messianic Israel Alliance and mentored under them, under Angus and Batia Wooten, for many, many years. Received ordinations there in the early 2000s. And that's not everybody. There are a lot of older men and a few women that Yah brought into my life and raised me up. And the last thing I ever wanted to do was pastor, and Yah kind of roped me into that, and that's a whole testimony of its own. So I've been mentored, and now I'm mentoring and helping other people. But that's how I came up. And this is really, it was not the way the church recognizes. I don't have any titles or any degrees behind my name, at least as far as our ecclesiastical, but that's how I was mentored. And then there are the fruits of the ministry of my wife and I that follow, and a person can look at those fruits. They speak for themselves as to the lives that have been touched, the materials that we've put out, and the teachings and so forth. And each of you has your own testimony of how Yah has been raising you up, and that's just an example of mine. And some, everybody's will be different, and he'll tailor fit to fit you and to fit your needs. And that's a beautiful thing as Yah works in the lives of people. So there isn't one exact way, but there is kind of an exact way that fits a biblical template. And to be honest with you, it's not the way, by and large, it's not the way the church is doing it. The church is doing it more the fleshly, corporate, worldly way. I'm not saying everything is bad, but so much of it's based on superficialities, on the cover of the book, based on, quite frankly, criteria that Yah considers to be invalid. We already covered that. Leaders must have a mature, walking out understanding of Torah and be able to teach and expound on it. As I said, it was the duties of the Levites to teach the Torah and the kings of Israel to know the Torah. I think we already covered that point. All right. Their lives, the lives of the ministers, must show evidence or fruit that they understand righteousness. The Hebrew word is tzadikah, like the sons of Zadok, Ezekiel 44, verse 7, and that they adhere to righteous standards in their homes, families, businesses, business dealings, and in their ministries. Another important criteria is leaders must know the difference between what the Bible defines as holy and profane, or the pure and the polluted, or the clean and the unclean. We see this in Ezekiel 22, verse 6, and Ezekiel 44, verse 23. And they must be able to judge righteously in all matters, Ezekiel 44, verses 23 through 24. If you don't know what Yehovah's righteous standards are, and you've taken a Bible and you've ripped pages out of the Bible, and you say, this has been done away with, this is not for me, this was for the Jews, this is for somebody else, and then you invalidate the word of Elohim, then that means you got a problem, bud. You got a real problem. Because if you're going around doing things and living lifestyles that the Bible calls abominable, you don't know the difference between the holy and the profane. And this would disqualify a lot of people. Anyway, we could expound on that. I have written a whole article on that subject, but we'll leave it there for now. Leaders who manifest any spiritual similitude to Ahab, Jezebel, Korah, or Balaam, and we could probably list a bunch of other false teachers and false prophets that the Bible identifies as such, are not of Elohim and must be rejected. We reject leaders and ministers that teach any egregious false doctrines, who preach another gospel, another Messiah Yeshua, who cause division, strife, factions, separation, offenses contrary to biblical truth, who are greedy for material gain, who preach for filthy lucre, who are covetous, and others ministries, and who are insubordinate to Yah-ordained spiritual leadership. And I have a whole list of scriptures after that one, which you can go get later. We reject congregations or ministries where women are functionally in charge and male leadership and eldership oversight is outright or de facto non-existent. Women have a vital place in ministry, and their gifts and roles should not be diminished in any way. They simply need to follow biblical protocols that dictate that they work under male eldership. Women can be pastors, women can be teachers, but they need to be under male eldership. And the Bible, this is the biblical model. I don't make up the rules. And Paul, based on the Torah, is very clear about that. The only exception that I see to this would be the role of the prophetess. I think of Deborah, and I think of Huldah. A prophet or a prophetess is in a special category of its own. And they are directly commissioned by Elohim. And if there's not a man to do the job, he will raise up a woman to do the job. And he is directly, again, that person is directly answerable to Elohim, and the proof of their prophetic ministry will be evident by what they say, what they preach, and how they conduct their lives. And that's the only exception to that rule that I can see in the scripture. Unless one fits the biblical qualifications of a prophet, there is no place in YHVH's biblical model for one man or one woman ministries. All leaders inside and outside the local congregation need to be accountable to several other leaders who themselves meet the biblical qualifications for leadership in the redeemed Israelite community. In this way, the body of Yeshua is protected from false teachers. Young leaders are mentored and raised up and learn from the wisdom and experience of older leaders. In this way, spiritual errors can be quickly corrected before they get out of hand, and the sheep of YHVH are led astray spiritually. I hope this is making sense to you. This is just really, all this stuff is common sense stuff. There are no examples in the scriptures where YHVH servant leaders ever asked for money or took offerings. The one exception is in the entire Bible was when Moses took an offering for the tabernacle. The other exception is Paul took an offering for the poor people in Jerusalem. But they did not take an offering for the money to come into themselves. That is not in the Bible. In the 18 years that I pastored, and in the 32 years in ministry that I've been in, I've never once passed a plate or taken an offering for myself. I maybe took an offering for a guest speaker that we had, but I never took an offering for myself or for our ministry. We put and the people that are watching on Zoom, Anna and Angie, you know this to be true. We had an offering box in the back of the room or the front or wherever it happened to be, and people could come and give as they wanted, and we other than teaching on tithing, we never did the money pump thing. We never, very, very seldom. I could probably count on one hand a number of times, or maybe two hands, over 18 years, a number of times I told the people we needed money. And I didn't take a salary myself. Quite frankly, I didn't take one because not enough money ever came in to support me. So I made my living from the business. But anyway, there are no examples in the scriptures where YHVH's servants, leaders, are ever asked for money or took offerings. And this goes back to the Didache. The Didache is a very interesting book. It's an early writing. It's called the Didache, the Teachings of the Apostles. It's written, one of the earliest documents in the early church. It was written circa AD 100, making it probably the oldest and most reliable non-canonical writing from the post-apostolic era. And in chapter 14, it is written that any itinerant biblical teacher or prophet who asks for money for himself is to be categorically rejected as a false teacher or false prophet. And you can go read the Didache. I have it here in my library. That was written about 100 AD. So we're talking just a few years after the death of the Apostle John. And I find nothing wrong with that. But boy, I tell you, that would disqualify a lot of people who go from church to church to church, taking up offerings and living off the fat of the land. Okay, don't get me going on that one. That's a button that I can easily have pushed. Now, next point. Divorce and remarriage is very rampant in the modern church, including in many Messianic or Hebrew roots movements, in the Hebrew roots movement. Sadly, some Messianic teachers or leaders are probably living in adultery since they have been previously divorced without biblical grounds while they were a born-again believer. I do believe there are biblical grounds for divorce, but they're very strict and stringent. And I also don't believe that if you were married before you were saved, that is an unforgivable sin. If that's the case, then that means that that's one sin that Yeshua's blood does not cover. I don't believe that. But if one is divorced and remarried for unbiblical grounds, I believe that disqualifies, while they are saved, that disqualifies a person in ministry leadership. And they shouldn't be in leadership. Now, they could possibly be a teacher, but I don't want them to be teaching about marriage. They could be an evangelist. They can bring people in, but they cannot be at the head of a church or an elder if they were divorced not for biblical grounds. There are some people who they come to a knowledge of Torah and their spouse abandons them. And the person waits for years, and I've talked to many people like this over the years. The person waits for that they pray for that person, their spouse, and the spouse just leaves them, abandons their children, goes off and marries somebody else. I believe that you're free to remarry. And people debate about that. But I can show that from the teachings of Yeshua and to Torah. Because people's hearts get hard, and Moses allowed for a bill of divorcement. But time was given to reconcile. And if it didn't reconcile and the person went off in left field somewhere, then I don't believe that the person, the righteous party, has to suffer for the rest of life because of an unrighteous person. Okay. All right. What about existing ministries? What if you have a ministry out there that's existing that maybe doesn't fit all these criteria? But they seem to have a viable ministry. They seem to be doing good things. Look, I am not going to, who am I to put shackles on YHVH Elohim? He used Balaam's jackass, Balaam's donkey to minister. He used Balaam to minister. Yah is sovereign. He can raise up anybody to do anything, anytime. So there may be ministries out there where they don't fit these criteria I've just listed, but they're literally good fruits are coming from those ministries. They are walking in righteousness from that point forward. They are manifesting the fruits and maybe the gifts of the Spirit. They're following Torah. They're not causing strife and discord. They're preaching the gospel as it should be. Who am I to question that? So there it is, by their fruits you shall know them. Judge righteous judgment. By their fruits you shall know them. So I give allowances for people that might have been raised up, that Yah plucked out of the gutter or out of this or that or whatever, and he's using them in spite of all their past. He can do that. So we want to make allowances for that too. I believe there's grace and there's mercy. What about new leaders being raised up? Again, this is a real problematic issue in the Messianic Hebrew Roots movement, because there are really no mentoring programs. There are no Bible colleges, places like that. I've seen many come and go, but none of them have succeeded. So what do you do? What about a young person that has a call on his life and they want to go into ministry? Well, they need to find some older mentors and be mentored and raised up following the criteria that we already discussed. But when somebody just pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps and they just self-proclaim, maybe they take a couple Hebrew classes or a Greek class, and maybe they get a bachelor's degree or master's degree at some Christian seminary or whatever, and now suddenly they're launched into ministry and they're running a congregation. And I see this happening. I could list names of ministries right now that are very, very influential and are very famous. And they were young guys that broke off of, another ministry, and now they're teaching the good, the bad, and the ugly. They teach some of their things are good, but some of their stuff, I listen to it and I go like, you guys are clueless. You obviously have not mentored. And they're well-meaning. They're novices and they're green. I believe that you should not be a pastor unless you're at least 40 years old. Now, that's my opinion. But at age 40, by that time, you've got some children. And you've got a marriage and you've got some children. 30, you can be mentoring. But 30, you're launching the ministry. 40, you're now a father. 50, you're a father and you're probably an empty nester. By 60, you're usually a grandfather. I believe that that's when I started pastoring. I was launching the ministry at age 30. I didn't plan this. Just like the priest, that's when I first got into ministry. At age 40, I'm pastoring a congregation. I didn't plan it. Age 50, well, we had our kids a little bit later. We still had kids living at home. By 60, I'm almost 63, because we had our kids a little bit later. We got married later, my wife and I. Our kids a little bit older. I should be a grandfather. I feel like a grandfather, but I'm not technically yet. But I do have kids I look to like grandchildren. But anyway, that's the age range. Take that with a grain of salt. This is Nathan speaking, not the word of Elohim, but I think there's a wisdom in that. So, in conclusion, what are some other qualifications for leaders? Leaders cannot be hirelings or in it for self-serving purposes, as Yeshua defines it in John chapter 10. Leaders must fit the qualifications of being a true shepherd after Yehovah's heart, as defined in Ezekiel 34. Leaders must be those who seek first the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness, and not material gain in all areas of their lives. Matthew 26, 24, and 33. Leaders must be teachers of the word who have faith and righteous conduct worth emulating by those they lead. This means that they need to be spiritually mature in the word, in their faith, and in holiness. Hebrews 13:7. Leaders must be able to preach the word whenever called to do so, be able to rebuke, exhort, and reprove in patience according to the word of Elohim. 1 Timothy 3:2. A leader's ministry must be characterized by reconciliation. Paul talks about the ministry of reconciliation in 1 Corinthians 5:18. A leader must not be ashamed of the gospel, Romans 1:16, but preach the message of the cross consistently and without compromise, 1 Corinthians 1:23. Yehovah condemns certain leaders as false leaders. If these leaders, they have a head knowledge, understanding of Torah, but who don't know Elohim intimately, Jeremiah 2:8. Or leaders who rule by their own means or on their own authority or are self-appointed, Jeremiah 5:31. Leaders who commit adultery are liars, who strengthen the hands of evildoers, who don't stand up for what is right, who don't hold others biblically accountable, who allow those who don't meet the qualifications of biblical leadership to hold positions of leadership, Jeremiah 23:14. Leaders who reject the knowledge of the Torah, Yehovah will reject, Hosea 4:6. Leaders who teach what the people want to hear, or teach things which accommodate the lusts of people and fail to expose sin, Hosea 4:8, 8 through 9, and 1 Timothy 4:3. And leaders who are hirelings and preach for money, Micah 3:11. So there, I gave some people some serious things to think about. You may not like what you heard. I don't care. It's what the Bible says. And I don't make up the rules. I don't make up the criteria. I'm not the one that judges anybody. It's the word of Elohim that judges us. Either our lives meet these standards, they don't. If they don't, and you're involved in these things illegitimately, then you probably need to go back and get your life straightened out. I hope this has been a blessing, and this will also help people who are maybe not in leadership righteously evaluate those who are in leadership as to whether these are people that you should be listening to, looking to, following, admiring, or whatever. And so this gives us tools and to work with and to evaluate people by, not judgmentally, but just this is what the Bible says, and I can't go in that direction. I got to go in this direction. It's also a way to evaluate whether somebody is in righteous leadership and fits the qualifications, or whether they're somebody that you want to hitch your wagon to, so to speak. So there you go. I hope this has been a blessing to somebody. So.